to the second and final part, unless Netflix commission a series, of Plan S and Open Science on the right track. And I have a hunch that probably, partly from doing a lot of stuff online like this, that about 90% of the audience watching this would also have been there for part one. So on the basis of that assumption, I am going to keep my introduction pretty short. For the benefit of anyone who has joined us, though, suffice to say, first of all, welcome. Very glad to have you with us. This should be a really interesting, stimulating session. Second, roughly what you missed in the first half of this double bill was an overview of Plan S in a broader open science context, a bit about why and how a wide-ranging group of research funding organizations came together under the banner of Coalition S for this concerted effort to make all publicly funded research truly open access and to begin transition by 2021, which you'll realize is very, very soon. So that is where we're picking up now. With that deadline looming, what still needs to be tweaked or transformed or trashed in the months ahead if Plan S is to deliver its ambitious goals in full and on time? Which are the many potholes or potential potholes on the road to compliance, from open access transitioning schemes to viable publishing models to ensuring price transparency, need urgent attention if we're to ensure the whole process doesn't get derailed? And I appreciate that this transport metaphor started with roads and ended with rail, but it's a complicated journey that we're setting out on. The other thing we're going to get to is a lot more of your questions and comments. We had time for a few during part one, but this time round we're going to have even more time. So I'm again please, for the benefit of those of you who are just joining us, you can submit them via the chat button, second left on the bottom of your screen. You can send them in at any point, but we'll get to them all after we've heard from our two main speakers and our two responders. Right, all clear? Ish, then let us get straight to our first speaker. It is less than 10 months since Mark Schultz was re-elected as president of Science Europe, overseeing the actions of an association of 37 major European research and research funding organizations across 28 countries that have done much to develop Plan S in its present form. Now, a lot has happened in those 10 months. So where are we now? And which way or ways should open access and Plan S now be heading? Mapping the route forward, the president of Science Europe, Mark Schultz.
Yes, well, thank you. And as was mentioned in the first session, this is actually the exact anniversary date of the launch of Plan S, which was launched on the 4th September 2018. So we're exactly 2 years in it, and I should say I'm happy to say that it is more alive than ever, because some predicted that it would just be a very short-lived firework, which it hasn't appeared to be. I'm also very glad that we had such excellent speakers and presenters in the first session. So because much of what I was intending to present here will be repetition. So I'm not going too much into this, and my presentation will hopefully be a little bit shorter of what it was supposed to be, because I think Jon Arne and Eva Kostas and Thomas have covered very broadly the topic and the subject. So we can maybe have a little bit more time for questions. And one of the questions I think that was asked in the first session was about, if I remember well, was this formulation: why is it not just enough to do great science? What's all about this openness, and why is it so important? And I think my view on this is that when we say great science, that's a little bit of a tautology. We have to define what does it mean, great science, or what is part of science. And it's interesting to know that the great theoretician of science, Robert Merton, already in the 40s, clearly spoke about open communication, said that it is a constitutive part of the ethos of science, that it is part of sharing results and sharing data. Sharing results is what makes science a different kind of activity, and what makes the scientific community a different kind of community from others. So I think this whole idea of open access, open science, sharing results is so constitutive of part that it means great science, means good science, first of all, and part of good science is the openness. And I think Jon Arne has made an extremely compelling statement, especially in relation now with the global pandemic with COVID-19. How important suddenly it has come to clearly to our mind how important open science and the openness aspects of science is. Can we still imagine? Could we still conceive embargo periods of 6 or 12 months on results related to COVID-19? I think it would be totally inconceivable. That would mean that the first results would only come out, the first research results would only come out now. And so I think nothing could have better demonstrated the value and the importance of open science. Now, it's not entirely new. I usually start my presentation with this, which is the Berlin Declaration. There have been others. Now, there are two reasons why I present this slide, or why I start presentations with this particular slide. One reason is that the Plan S has adopted the definition of open access that was embodied in the Berlin Declaration. There are a number of alternative definitions, so this is the one that we've chosen because it embodies the concept of reuse. It's not just about reading, not just about access to read papers, but also about the possibility to reuse content from papers. But that's maybe not so important. What is more curious here is the year number. You see that this dates back to 2003. So that's quite a long time. That's 17 years, more than 17 years ago that we're already speaking about open access. And it's not as if nothing had happened in between. We've all had these principles and roadmaps on open, including Science Europe. So I've explicitly included, of course, the Science Europe principle on open access, which were first published in 2013, which is more than 7 years ago. And I learned, an hour earlier, I learned a Spanish expression, which is raising a toast to the sun, which Eva Mendes mentioned. I think that describes it very well. These were all we were all nice intentions. We were raising a toast to the sun, saying we establish roadmaps, principles, and so on. But nothing really happened. I think the sobering reality was that the percentage of paywalled papers during all these years stayed close to 75%. My understanding is that it is still close to that figure. So despite all these nice intentions since the 2003 Berlin Declaration, not much had happened. And that's a little bit what gave birth to Plan S. So when Robert Jan Smits came to see me, and I hope he won't object. I'm sure he will not. So this is a little bit, this is literally taken out of an email exchange that both of us had when we prepared Plan S. I think we realized that something different was needed. If we continue to with the principles and on which most people agree, if we continue just announcing nice principles, if we continue to manifest good intentions, then that won't bring us further. So in that sense, Plan S was per design different from other initiatives. And it was different in the sense that, yes, we mandate something as funders. It is a clear mandate to grantees to publish open access. And as a counterparty, we would also then, of course, commit to cover the cost. That was always quite clear for me that we can't just mandate something, but not commit to cover costs. So that's something which was clear for right from the beginning for Plan S. It was also an attempt to align policies, open access policies, beyond individual funders. So what was missing, I think, in the whole landscape is that each university, each funder, each research center draw up their own open access rules and their open access principles and roadmaps, and there was very little alignment. So and yet open science and the realization of open science is something which needs to happen on a global scale. So here was an attempt to align open access policies between several funders. And I also would like to recognize, of course, the leading role of the European Commission here, because the European Commission has always been at the forefront of open science. But even for Plan S, when Robert Jan came to see me and say, well, this is not something which the Commission can do alone. We have to we have to get more funders on board. And if we have a critical mass of funders on board, then maybe we will be in a position to change the system. We set a clear timeline, initially 2020, but then we decided after a large consultation that maybe we should give it a little bit more time, so it will actually enter into application next year. There are various transitional arrangements foreseen until 2025. Another important point for me was that it should be about principles and not about a particular publication model. I had seen over the years that the adepts of green fighting against those that were in favor of gold open access, and then you have diamond, you have all kinds of gems now. So we said the plan should be beyond that. It should not be it's not to us, it's not up to funders to select to develop and design one particular publication model. We set principles, and whatever publication model is developed should, of course, align with these principles, but it's up to the scientific community, to the research community, to design the publication models that they wish to embrace. And that's, in a sense, has been the weakness and the strength of Plan S. To me, it was a strength because we moved beyond this green versus gold debate. But of course, it has been perceived as a weakness by many because we don't set a clear endpoint. But I still think it's the right choice. I don't think it should be up to Coalition S or to funders in general to set the clear endpoint. It should be more about principles. And the principles are very simple. The principles are straightforward, is no publication should be behind paywalls, no embargo periods any longer. I don't need to emphasize this. I think, again, as I say, the COVID-19 crisis, I think that's the end of embargo periods. This discussion no longer has any reason to be there. Embargo periods are of no use to anyone, except maybe some publishers, but that's not a sufficient reason for us. Open license as embodied in the Berlin Declaration, so which is essentially CCBY license. We want transparency about pricing and contracts because funders are committed to put money into open access. So we want to know exactly what are we getting in return. We want the greatest possible transparency about this. And then there is, of course, the recognition that the hybrid model is a dead end, and that the only justification for the hybrid model, which has been around also for almost 20 years, but hasn't really succeeded in achieving the transition. So we accept that model only if it is genuinely transitional, and transitional means if we can see that both revenue streams, both pricing and costing are transferred, and that it in the end leads to full and immediate open access. So it's not about one particular model, and Jörn Boman and Bianca Klemmer have come up with 9 different routes of compliance to Plan S. In general, they can be summarized into 3 global routes. One is open access via publication, via platforms, full open access journals or platforms. One is open access via repositories, but with zero embargo. And one is through a number of possible transitional arrangements. Now, we were a little bit the transitional arrangements are being developed both by national consortia, in particular the Open Access 2020 initiative, of which Colleen is going to speak more in a minute. So I don't want to preempt on that. These transformative agreements have now really gained momentum. There are many countries and national consortia which have concluded such transformative agreements. So that's an important route to shift the whole publication system. We've also developed the notion or the concept of transformative journals, where various publishers can commit individual journals on a transformative path, and some publishers have announced that that's the road that they will be that they are going to pursue. And we have also, especially for society publishers, we have been working on transformative model agreements, and some of the society publishers, like the microbiome Microbiology Society and others have been making use of these transformative model agreements with the library consortia. So there are a number of transformative ways that are available. And again, I think the next speaker will go into more detail in that. And then the repository route, where we have devised a special strategy, which is the rights retention strategy, which is actually something that helps researchers to keep the rights on the intellectual ownership rights on their work. So because there has been this very bad habit by publishers to ask authors or researchers to sign away almost the entirety of their intellectual ownership, and so that they would be actually unable to deposit a manuscript version of their paper, of their accepted paper, in a repository. So this will no longer be possible, because we will make sure that in our grant agreements these rights are preserved, and that should allow actually any researcher to deposit a version of the manuscript as accepted by the journal, a copy of that manuscript into a repository and make it available under an open license without embargo period. Now, when we're looking forward, I think it shouldn't be up to us to define the model of the future. First of all, I don't think that the model of the future does exist. There will probably coexistence in the future of several publication models. Still, we've given some ideas of what may happen. So these famous transformative agreements, which currently have the two streams, read and publish, it is our belief that they should, after 2024, switch to pure publish deals, and that this should be for portfolio of subscription journals that have become open access journals, because after all, we want this transition to happen, and that the whole subscription model by then will have been dropped. A number of funders have committed that they would, in that case, also financially contribute to these deals, but that's of course something which depends very much on the national or on the country situation. A strong demand from the research community is to explore the diamond model much more extensively. So that's what we are in the process of doing. We have commissioned a study, a project, so that we can develop models of how funders can actually more actively support diamond publication models. And then again, if as Kostas mentioned, if all else fails, or even if it does not, one option, of course, is also for funders in the end to become part of the become part of the project, and to put in place publication platforms such as the Wellcome Trust and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations have already done, and such as the European Commission is in the process of doing. I think the challenges for the future is, as was also mentioned earlier in the session, is about changing the research culture. I think the motivations for open access are clear to all of us. I think we can see that there are societal benefits, that the conception of research as a public good is something which is not compatible with paywalled research papers. We also see that it costs us an enormous amount of money. The subscription model has become totally unsustainable. Even the richest universities can no longer afford to pay for all these subscription bundles. So I think the good reasons, the motivations for open access are quite clear to many. But of course, what steps into the ways are other considerations about careers, considerations about what we value, impact factors, rankings. We have again had this series of university rankings. I think we should stop this nonsense, because if you look under the hood and see how these rankings are computed, you will see what happens, and that is just you completely afraid of how these are computed. So we should ignore these university rankings, which are just juvenile beauty contests. That's what I call them. Same for metrics and KPIs. So I think there needs to be this very important reflection about the future of the research culture and the research assessment and reward system. And this discussion has now started, and I'm very happy about that, because I think that's the real challenge that we have to approach to make open access a reality. I think here again, funders and universities are taking the lead in this. And that's something which also with Science Europe is very high on our agenda, to make sure what is the next. And I think I'm happy also that we do have the next generation of researchers on board with this, because this, and it's hard work. I can tell you from my own experience, if you're sitting on a committee that assesses grants or proposals, or that assesses candidates for positions, of course you not over and again you hear still statements like, well, the person has published in Science or Nature, has 3 papers in Cell, and it needs courage. It needs courage of a chairman then to stand up and say, well, this is not what we should assess on. We have committed to the DORA declaration. This is not the criterion that should come into consideration, and we should really look on what this person, this researcher, what he has achieved, not just publication-wise, but also, for instance, value for society. So this is a very big project. Maybe we need a plan S for the research culture, or plan R, something which is heavily discussed, which we debate currently. I think that's the way forward. And I'll stop it here, because I think after all, I've used all of my time. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You've only used all of your time for the presentation, not all of your time for the discussion, which we will have plenty of later. And you've given us several things there that I think we're going to want to pick up with in that discussion. Embargo periods are of no use to anyone. The hybrid dead end. I particularly like the university rankings or a juvenile beauty contest, so you might want to come back on any of those as well. I should also say, I'm aware that some of you will be joining this session who weren't part of the first session. And for those who were, I should explain, when Mark refers to Kostas, he's talking about Kostas Glinos, the EC's head of unit for open science. So I know a lot of you were in the first session, but some of you weren't, so I'll try and provide subtitles. I also expect a lot of you watching this will already have a strong interest or involvement with the whole subject of open access and open science. But again, for those who don't, do not be afraid to send in your questions saying, could you just unpack a bit about what you mean by this when we're talking about various aspects of gold versus green or whatever. If you want that unpacked a bit, we will do so. So I'm trying to make this as open as I possibly can. Now, Mark, having kicked us off with a properly European perspective on open access and Plan S, our second speaker is going to give an even bigger picture with a look at the efforts worldwide to bring about this new era of open science. Colleen Campbell is a former actress who spent over 2 decades adding drama and direction to the academic information sector. She says she's passionate about libraries, and after a stint as European Director for Strategic Partnerships at the digital library JSTOR, she now leads outreach and engagement for the Global Open Access 2020 initiative. And what exactly is the Open Access 2020 initiative? Our curtain rises on Colleen Campbell.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a joy to be here with you all. And actually, I'm not too far from Trieste. I'm speaking to you from my home near Florence, Italy. So indeed, global meeting. That's quite exciting. I have been juggling my slides up until the very last minute because many things have been said by the previous speakers, Mark Schultz himself, and also in the session beforehand. So I've really condensed these to just giving you some notions about transformative agreements, and then we can have more time for discussion later. So hang on, let me see how I can advance my slides. As Mark introduced, there are many right tracks to open publication of research. There's not just one. And I think that's quite important to state at the beginning. I will be talking about one mode of transition, which is transformative agreements. And yes, but that is not to say that the institutions that I represent do not also invest their efforts and their funding in other forms of open publication. So the Open Access 2020 initiative, this initiative came about 10 years on, or a few more than 10 years on, from the Berlin Declaration, which Mark quoted, that from 2003, basically out of frustration, because in the years that had passed, we had not seen the progress that we wanted to see in opening up research and the results of research. So we saw the need for research performing organizations to come together and think about what other ways they could foster growth in open publication. And the idea was to create a global initiative, a global effort around this concept. And that is, we want to we are investing in new and improved forms of open access publication, but we cannot ignore that big chunk of scholarly journals that are closed behind paywalls. We can't go around it. We have to also think about going through it. So what is that commitment? It is a commitment to take the money that we are spending on subscriptions to closed journals and repurposing that money, redirecting it to support open access publishing instead. And we can do that in many ways. The idea here is that if scholarly journals exist today, they are there in some way. They are serving the research communities. Otherwise, they wouldn't be publishing so much in them. So we need to find a way of making those journals open access, and we will do that by reorganizing the financial streams underneath the scholarly journal publication system. In that initiative, just to give you an idea of context, we've got over 150 research organizations from 5 continents who participate in OA 2020, and they in turn represent thousands of individual institutions and universities. So where are we? Where are we in the situation? You've seen a few different graphics in the course of the afternoon. Here is one, and you have the link to the actual data set if you want to play around with it. We see that 82% of new research articles are published in closed journals today, despite all of our efforts. So if we're going to be pragmatic and think about what we can do to change this, we have to think about what is the leverage that we have to do that. And right now, a very clear picture from my perspective is the money that we spend, of course. So that those 82% of new research articles are published in journals that we pay to subscribe to. We globally pay 7.6 billion euro a year in the subscription system. In some way, yes, the functioning of the journals, but also the propagating of this paywall system. So we need to rethink how we use our money. But before I tell you about how we're going to do this, I think we should understand. I want to make sure that everyone has a clear picture of the financial implications of the status quo under the subscription system. I mean, Mark talked all about the implications for science, of course, but now speaking from the perspective of a library, the library, which is the entity that is actually paying for the subscriptions, and the institutions that fund the libraries, what are the financial implications of this system? First of all, in scholarly journal publishing, there is utter lack of price transparency. And this is absolutely unique in any industry of the world. In no industry is pricing so opaque. How does that happen? Well, as an individual institution, their library or a national library consortium wants access to a journal, they work with a publisher to define a subscription agreement, and in 99.9% of those agreements, there is a non-disclosure clause. So that keeps the pricing opaque. Why is that? Because in the start, when we transitioned from print journals to online journals, or the online versions of journals, it was very new. 1990s, no one knew what this would all look like. No one knew what it would cost. And so in quite a few cases, the pricing was created based on the previous print spend. So how many individual print subscriptions were there at an institution? Let's sum them up, have our total, and this is what the online price will be for that institution. While that might have been justified at the very start, and we are no longer in a situation where such pricing not based on actual cost can be justified. And these big deals of online packages, online journal packages, are often paid in lump sums. So for one set fee, you get access to the entire journal portfolio, and every year there's very much an annual price increase on that. But we've seen that the annual increase in subscriptions, in these big deal subscriptions, have literally gone up 60% in the past decade or so, whereas your average price, the CPI is around 16%. So this is completely out of scale with what's really happening. So that problem is hard enough, but now we have another problem, and that is the concept of hybrid publishing. So on one hand, you have the library who pays for subscriptions. On the other hand, because of funder mandates, because of perhaps the individual will of a researcher who wants to have the broadest possible readership for their findings, they will publish open access in these traditional journals. But for a fee, the publisher will request an article processing charge, an extra fee to publish that individual article in a subscription journal, open access. Now, that has created a duplicate revenue stream going to publishers over on top of the same journals. On one side, you have the subscriptions, and on the other, you have open access publishing in those same journals for an added fee. This is what we call the double dipping phenomenon. But then when we think about the financial implications, that's not all. Our authors are signing copyright transfer agreements for the publishers. Their work is being handed, or the articles are handed. The rights to their work is handed to the publishers, who can then make even more money off of those articles. If we want to attempt to quantify how much the copyright of an article is worth, we could look to the court case brought forth in the state of New York, I think it was, in which Elsevier sued the pirate platform Sci-Hub in 2017 for copyright infringement of 100 articles, and was awarded $15 million in damages, which we can infer then the copyright of an individual research article is $150,000 that we are giving to the publishers. So these are just some of the financial implications of the subscription system. So how do we change this? What is the leverage that we have to change the status quo? First of all, we have some information at hand. We have new data. We know we can learn insights from the fully open access publishing market, because the majority of fully open access journals, those that are based on an APC model, openly or transparently indicate how much it costs to publish an article in their journals. And if we take averages on there, we know that fee might be around €1,600 on average. We can gather information on hybrid journals and understand the APC fees involved to publish articles open access in subscription journals with the hybrid option. And we know that on average there, the fee is around €2,500. So now we have an understanding of what it costs today. I'm not saying that that's a fair price or a reasonable price, but this is what it costs today to publish open access in fully open. Now then, we also know, and you have links to the data that I'm quoting here, we also know that under the current subscription system, we are paying globally, I mentioned this before, around 7.6 billion euro a year in subscriptions globally. And if we take and if we look at how many new research articles are published in those journals, that averages out to a cost under the subscription system of €3,800 to up to €5,000 per article. So Obviously, that means that there is actually already enough money in the subscription system to sustain open publication of those same journals. The money is already there. We don't need hybrid APCs on top. We don't need more money. There's more than enough money to transition today's journals to open access. And another piece of leverage that we need to think about, and that is the knowledge gained by turning our focus to publishing. We talked about a cultural change. We have to do this also in institutions and libraries, and how we think about our relationships with publishers. Right now, the library has a relationship with a publisher for subscriptions. Authors have relationships with publishers for as they submit their journals and work on journals, peer review, etc., editorial boards. But we still have this focus, on the old system, on the subscription. We need to think about the leverage of our research and understand the publishing trends of our authors, because with that information we have better leverage in changing the system. So what is one of the key strategies of OA 2020 to repurpose the subscription money that we have into funds to support open access? One of the key strategies is transformative agreements. Basically, instead of a subscription agreement, we now negotiate a different kind of agreement, turning our attention to publishing. As I said before, the idea here is, okay, with the knowledge that there is enough money in the system, I, as an institution, can commit to keeping that money in the system. But in exchange, I don't want to talk about access. I want to talk about open access publishing for my authors. So this is the logic. We need to shift our logic to open access publishing. We have some guidelines, some general characteristics of these agreements. Authors retain copyright, of course, is the baseline. They aim to constrain costs, means no double dipping, and cost neutral, cost based on former subscription spend, meaning we if we look right now, as we talk with a publisher in negotiations, we look at how much we're spending in subscriptions. We look at how much money our authors might be paying to publish in hybrid journals. And well, the logic is that hybrid spending goes away, and in exchange for that money, we want publishing. They must move toward transparent pricing. We want to know exactly what we're paying for, and by putting the focus on publishing, we can do that. We can take our costs and associate them at the article level. How many articles were published with this publisher in a given year? Okay, what is the per article fee? And this is what we will pay. That is not to say that we are purporting an APC model per se. We're just trying to associate what costs are involved. Then we can, depending on different contexts, we can talk about different formats these fees might take. The transformative agreements are a temporary and transitional mechanism toward a complete and definitive shift to open access. That is an underlying principle. And they are to prepare the entire research community for a fully open future. I mentioned before, we have the money we spend in subscriptions is one big lump sum. And over the years, that library budgets, the money that they would spend on social sciences and humanities materials, for example, has constantly had to decrease because the STEM journals and big deal packages grew in cost. But the budgeting didn't change for the library. Well, as we shift our focus to open access publishing, that lump sum disintegrates because we are now associating cost for the service provided, open access publishing of an article that can be quantified. That also, if we have transformative agreements, that also enables the authors from all disciplines to have the funding to publish their article open access. So it's not just reserved to the STEM. If we'd have an agreement for an entire portfolio, and these big deal portfolios have journals across disciplines, all of a sudden now the institution can support all of the researchers to publish their works open access. if we have a transformative agreement in Germany, where my library, the Max Planck Digital Library, is based, for example, in the project deal agreements, if we have these on a national scale, as there is Jan Arne's in Norway, we can all of a sudden the entire subscription system has these major pockets of openness. The University of California, which publishes 7% of the research of the United States, they now have an agreement with Springer Nature. That is a huge pocket of openness in the portfolio of Springer Nature. As we create these holes, these pockets of openness, the subscription system as a whole will fall away at a certain point. And as more and more institutions negotiate transformative agreements, we will see this happening. And we do see this happening. More and more institutions are negotiating transformative agreements. We might think here in Europe, we see this as a European phenomenon. Really, it was Austria that negotiated the first transformative agreement, I think in 2015 or so. And now they are being negotiated truly around the world. So this is a global effort because it truly is. If you think about the financial implications I mentioned before, it makes no sense to continue with the subscription system. And just to give an idea of what impact you can have, here's a case study of Sweden. I say let's focus on publishing. So if we take a look at the output, the article output of Sweden, and here I'm talking about corresponding authors, okay? So the primary author, the main author of the article. Right now, this is the picture of publishing in Sweden. So you see that the majority of articles from Sweden by Swedish authors are published in Elsevier journals, Springer Nature, Wiley, Informa, that's Taylor and Francis, and on down the line, okay? Now, Sweden began negotiating transformative agreements just a few years ago, and today, thanks to their transformative agreements, you see on the right where, in the paler salmon color you have there, this is the openness they have achieved for their research. So it's quite in just a few years, and this is why OA 2020 was called OA 2020, because it's true, and it's been proven here that in the few short years since 2013, 14, when we started this effort, to today, 2020, it is possible for an individual country or institution to transition the majority of their outputs to open access. Here, just an idea of how it can grow exponentially. If you see over the years, I hope you can see that it's rather small. This is just a visualization of the transformative agreements registered in the ESAC registry, which is a sister initiative to OA 2020. And it's more operational. So we're trying to increase the knowledge and information on the very operational aspects around transformative agreements for libraries. And you can see that as more agreements grow, it's not just flipping one journal. We're talking about flipping portfolios of journals. And as you saw also in the slide before, it's not just the big three, it's many different publishers, 32 publish here, large and small, learned societies transitioning, countries all over the world, not just the big folks in Germany, the UK, but also Lithuania. Lithuania has recently signed an agreement with the Royal Chemistry Society, if I'm not mistaken, to ensure that their outputs are open access. So it's a very pragmatic shift to open access. And I want to just, my final slide here is just to highlight the power of alignment. OA 2020 and Coalition S, there is an alignment there because the Coalition S recognizes, on the one hand, that this is a truly transitional mode it's a truly transitional pathway for scholarly journals. And I think that as more and more national consortia and institutions, or national consortia especially, negotiate these transformative agreements, it also is, in a way, it's also empowering for Coalition S, because transformative agreements allow a country to give their researchers more options to publish open access. Right. It's completing that picture of fully open journals and venues and repositories, and the journals, that those traditional journals that still publish 2 million articles a year. So, and one final comment, as Mark said, I want to reiterate this concept of alignment also in terms of stakeholders. It's not just one pathway that is going to achieve open access, and similarly it's going to take multiple stakeholders working together to achieve what we want to achieve. So in the case of transformative agreements, it takes the libraries, the researcher community, and the rectors, the research administration, to have a good negotiation with publishers. So I will leave you with those those pieces, and thank you, and look forward to more discussion.
Thank you. Colleen Campbell there, transforming, I think you'll agree, our knowledge of transformative agreements. Lots of interesting lines about repurposing money to support open access. And when you've got 7.6 billion euros a year, that's a lot to repurpose. So please, I'm sure many of you again will want to pick up on that. We've had a few questions coming in while Colleen's been speaking, but keep them coming in through the chat button at the bottom of the screen. And as soon as you've had our 2 quick responses, we'll get to as many of them as we can. And we're going now from a speaker with a past in theatre to someone with a future in operas. That's Operas, OPERAS, the European Research Infrastructure for the Development of Open Scholarly Communication in the Social Sciences and Humanities. I'm pretty sure that's an acronym, but I've no idea what letter stands for what. Important bit, though, is that Suzanne Dumichel, as well as being many other things, is the Strategy and Partnerships Coordinator for Operas. And with financial support from Science Europe, Operas recently embarked on Project Diamond S, a study for Coalition S using data from Diamond journals right around the world to explore collaborative, non-commercial, open access publishing models. Now, I'm not sure the results are with us yet, but I think she can tell us a bit about it. Over to Suzanne Dumichel.
Thank you, Quentin, for this introduction, and thank you as well for Anne and the Research Council of Norway for the invitation. So we already hear a lot about the Plan S principle and the different issues and financial questions that may exist, the different models. So I'd like, with this very short presentation, to focus on a specific project, a concrete action that can be done towards the implementation of the Plan S principles. So this is a presentation about the project Diamond S, which is coordinated by OPRAS. And OPRAS is the European research infrastructure focused on open scholarly communication for social science and humanities. So we developed within OPRAS different kind of services for the open scholarly communication practices in social science and humanities. So about so my slide doesn't want to change. Yeah, okay, sorry. So the project Diamond S is a study which is commissioned on behalf of Coalition S to perform an analysis and overview of collaborative, non-commercial Diamond publishing journals and platforms. So the main objective is actually to provide an overview of the Diamond journals and platform landscape and provide a deeper analysis to identify the concrete ways to support and strengthen the Diamond journals and their platform and the journal publishing sector as a whole. So it's not a disciplinary study, even if OPRAS is dealing more only with social science and humanities. Here we coordinate a project for the whole research scientific sector. So the method we developed is to launch a general study which covers the global landscape and focus mainly on Europe at large and Latin America. So we have 6 detailed objectives on which I will go very, very quickly. The first one, of course, to provide an analysis of the global landscape of what exists as for the Diamond journals and platform. The The second objective is to identify why and to which extent the author and their collaborator want to publish in this kind of journals and platform. The third objective is to identify the current funding models for this platform. The fourth objective is about to identify the scholarly publishing sector where efficiency gains, collaboration, training in terms of shared service are required. The fifth objective, identify the main challenge faced by these kind of journals in terms of open access policy, industry standard, operational and technical requirements. And the last but not least objective is to provide an action plan and recommendation for principle and funding mechanism. So the survey is currently open. We publish it in several languages. You have the link to the survey in the slide if you want to share it with the different publishers you have in your network. We got already 2,000 answers. At the beginning, it was planned to close the survey at the end of the summer, but the big number of answers and different requests from publishers to open, to keep it a bit more open, imply that it's still open, and we will close it at the end of September and expect to have the analysis in October. In parallel, we launched a complementary work which include a semi-quantitative analysis and a literature review on the practices of open access practices for journals and platforms. And once the result analysis of the survey will be done, we will organize focus group and interview. So this project is coordinated by OPRA's research infrastructure with 4 main partners: PARC Europe, Utrecht University, DOAG, and the Arctic University of Norway, and 4 associate partners: LIBER, OASPA, and RESH, 5 actually, Ridalic, Amélie SCA, and CSI. So to conclude very, very quickly, how OPRA's research infrastructure contributes to Plan S implementation. Through this Diamond S project. Unfortunately, I cannot give you the first answer as the analysis hasn't started yet, but I hope we will publish something very soon. But also through our services, there are DOAB service about the certification of books, which is more focused on the quality of research. The metric service about the evaluation of research. We already hear that open access principle implies to have an influence on the evaluation of research, and through our discovery service, which enhance the discovery of open access publication and open data in the social science and humanities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne de Michel, and thank you particularly for going really fast and making that more of an operetta than the full opera. Now, the panel discussion is imminent, as is where we get to your questions and comments. We've had a few coming in, and there's still room for more. So you know where to go to the chat box at the bottom of the page, and I will try and get as many of them as we can. First, though, we need to meet the last member of that panel. And to provide us with the perspective from publishing, we're going to hear now from Carrie Webster, VP Open Access at Springer Nature in London, and a long-serving board member of OASPA, the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association. Now, Carrie, when it comes to open access, there are lots of different stances, there are lots of different nuances. Can you give us a brief overview of where Springer Nature are now?
Thanks, Clinton. Yes, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be with you all virtually. I will just provide a brief overview of Springer Nature with regards to OA and Plan S, and then really look forward to the discussions. So for those of you that don't know, Springer Nature is a mixed model publisher. We're one of the largest fully open access publishers with over 600 fully OA journals and over 100,000 gold open access articles published last year. And for these journals, Plan S compliance is pretty easy and done. But we're also a large publisher of subscription and hybrid journals. As a company, we are fully committed to a full open access transition. We see open science as the target, and gold open access really is an enabler to get there. It's not easy, but we believe we're well and truly on the path, and we do expect to be fully Plan S compliant. For Springer Nature, the route to an OA transition and the route to compliance with Plan S is Gold OA. And so we'll achieve this in the two ways that actually you've heard about already this afternoon. Transformative agreements, where we strive for national agreements. I would question Colleen's data, or maybe challenge slightly, on the first ever agreement. I think we had it with the Netherlands in 2014. But we've now got 11 national agreements in place, including the world's largest with Project Deal in Germany. But secondly, and just as importantly, I think, we have committed all of our own titles, including the Nature Research journals, to becoming transformative journals, which is, as Mark mentioned, is also an eligible compliant route. Transformative journals are really, really important to us to enabling OA in countries where there aren't agreements in place. It's great that the number of transformative agreements are really growing, but they do take time, they are complicated, and so ensuring that there's another route and for our journals and options for authors is really important for us. This slide speaks to a point that I was keen to make to really inform our panel discussions. I've mentioned that the journey to open access and indeed compliance is not easy. And I think it's really important that we recognise it requires focus and, as Colleen mentioned, collaboration. We are all in this together and trying, and it's not always easy. You've got different funding pots to negotiate, repurposing of funds. There are different policies in different countries, even within countries, and different funders. There's different structures within institutions, within governments. And it just means that the transition and compliance can be hard for all stakeholders. To give an example of this, of our transformative agreements that we've done, all took at least a year to negotiate and complete, at least a year, some far longer. And this wasn't because each party wasn't really trying to get to the end result, but because each one actually ended up just being a little bit different, a little bit complicated in its own way. And so, but what got us over the line was recognizing we were all trying to get to that end point together and trying to find a way forward. For us and many, as I've mentioned, the goal is open science. And so to that end, I believe that we need gold open access. And for gold open access, we need to ensure reliable funding. It's hard for publishers to commit to compliance and transition if the funding to enable this is not steady. Mark referenced that Plan S wasn't about models, but principles. But my view is that some models are better than others to achieve open science, which is why that we very much favour gold over green. The transition to OA is going to be hard enough, and there's lots for us to work through. And I think if we allow ourselves to become too distracted with green OA or thinking that that's good enough, we can stop before we reach the end point. And whilst that can enable compliance, I would question whether it can really deliver that full transition and the benefits that the version of record to open science can deliver. And so from our side, that's really where our focus is on. It's on open science and open access to the version of record. And that's it. I will leave that there. And I'm really looking forward to the questions and discussions with you all.
Great. Well, you won't have to look forward to it for very long because they're coming right now. So thank you very much. Just before I get to everybody, though, I've got one question specifically for you, Carrie. As I said, there will be people in this session who are maybe not as in deep in this world, and we've had all this stuff about we've got gold, we've got diamond, we've got green, and you know, maybe there's platinum out there, I don't know, but can you just give us a very brief for those who aren't familiar with these terms, because that will help them follow the rest of the discussion.
Sure, I will do my best to articulate it as simply as possible. We do like to have a whole
like being asked to all the fighting factions
colour scheme. I think in some ways there's similarities by what I would consider diamond, gold, and platinum, maybe. In that ultimately, I think it's fair to say they enable open access to the version of record, and with a CC BY license, or with a really open license, but they are enabling open access to the version of record. When we talk about green open access, you're talking about enabling access to the author's accepted manuscript. So it's been through peer review, it's been accepted, but it hasn't been formatted, it hasn't been put into its final format, hasn't been enhanced to make it fully shareable. It could actually just be a Word file with links and bits all over the place. And so it hasn't gone through the publisher's production system and uploaded onto the website. And so it's largely an inferior version, I would say, but you're talking about this version then becoming available, but after a defined embargo period. And the reason that historically we've had embargo periods is that recognizing that there is value to the publisher process. And so an embargo period means that content doesn't become available until the publisher has had a chance to recoup its costs and run its business through the subscription model. So very simply, this green open access is inherently tied to the subscription model, whereas gold open access, diamond, is different and enables the version of record to be open access.
Thank you. I just thought that was worth getting established. Now, okay, I'm going to open it up to the questions that have come in from you, the audience, in a moment. But one question, as is usual, from me, just to start things off. And I guess it's to all of you, but I want to lead on Mark. I was very struck by those slides you showed contrasting the nice intentions regarding open access versus the sobering reality. And, and also I think this was followed up by Colleen's slide about how 82% of new research is still appearing in closed journals. How do we get around that Europe-wide, maybe worldwide science problem? We're often great at committees, we're not so great at commitment. You need people not just to say yes, you need them to do yes. How do you get them to do that, Mark? I'm waiting for Mark, but Mark, are you still with us?
Can you hear me now?
Well, then Mark is not.
I think that's what Plan S was all about. Is about not having nice intentions, but really getting serious about it by mandating open access. And I think that in a sense this. And it's as Colleen says, came nicely together, of course, also it's the pressure that was exerted on the system from both sides, from the side of the funders on one hand, but also from the research institutions, and in particular from libraries and national consortia. But I think what we have seen since 2018 is really that things are moving, and even and we see publishers are moving. Publishers are trying now to adopt Plan S compliant publication models. There have been many more transformative agreements that have been concluded since the time. I'm quite sure that the pressure that was exerted through the funders in Coalition S that this has played a major role here. So yes, it's about really getting, how shall I say, getting things done and mandating things, being serious about it, and so we're on this track now, and I think that was probably what will last in the end. What we will look back, there was a defining moment where we moved away from the nice intentions and we were getting serious.
Do you think, in fact, it's probably done better because it was bolder than some other propositions, and maybe also more focused on principles rather than details? So that gave you the kind of vision, but it also gave you the drive.
I think so. Yes, I think it had to be bold, because otherwise it would just have had no effect. And it's important, of course, also that we have a core group of funders behind it with a willingness to implement it. I think there is now large acceptance by the scientific community, especially after the revision of Plan S, which we did in 2019, following a very large consultation, probably the largest ever public consultation that was held on an open access policy. So I think the acceptance is the wide acceptance is assured, and things will have to move now. And yes, maybe rights retention strategy, which is the green road, where we maybe that's I mean, some publishers are unhappy about that, but it's of course, and I make no excuse for that. It's also there to put additional pressure on the system and on the publishers to move.
Okay, I'm trying to read body language on a very small screen. It looks like Colleen wants to come in on this, but apologies if you didn't. You'll need to open your mic, Colleen, if you do.
Sorry. No, I was thinking about the what you were asking before, the previous question actually, and about this culture change. And I think that from my perspective, one of the motivators is, like it or not, money. and so we as an institution, if we see the money that is flowing through our institutions, because we don't know it's not known. The researchers have no idea how much money is spent on subscriptions, and the research office has no idea how much the authors are actually paying in APCs. So if we get a good we have a data problem in scholarly communication. We do not have good data around how much is published by whom, who's the corresponding author, and we're working on that now. So if we have good numbers as a basis, the numbers will be the motivator.
While we're there, we have a question very specifically about APCs, article processing charges. Saying how much is the cost of a, quote, reasonable APC? Can you put a number on that?
Is that for me?
It is for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean that, ultimately, I think the researcher has to decide that. And I see that even, I would say that Coalition S is even going faster than we can actually follow, because we have to remember we are in a transition phase. So right now, when I think about transformative agreements, the amount we pay per article, putting the main focus on publishing, that in some way we still have to pay for the access that we continue to get for all of that other content, right? So in transformative agreements, they are not defined by APCs. Okay, they are defined by a per article cost, which includes more than that. When we get to a world in which we have more transparency and can start comparing APCs, then we can begin to talk about the service levels that publishers provide and determine then what is a fair and reasonable APC. But we're not in the condition to do that fully as yet.
Carrie, I mean, you're obviously with us because you're from Springer Nature, and Springer Nature have taken a pretty forward-thinking view of all this. Other publishers may not be essentially the same on this one. How do you see them coming along? Now, how do you see the future for Springer Nature itself? Are you going to be, like a lot of big companies, changed into essentially a sort of IT giant providing workload for services and such to academics? You've mentioned about Nature, and what's happening to that. It's been with us for 150 years, but where's it going to be in another 20? Is it going to exist? Will it survive?
Well, there's a lot of questions.
I know. We're running out of time. A lot in.
I think other publishers, we will see more kind of joining the road to open access. And I think we are. You can see that in Colleen's graph for transformative agreements. My point, though, it sounds boring to say they're really complicated to do. That is part of the reason why things take time. When we did our agreement in Germany, I think it's fair to say that Project Deal could only handle doing so many agreements at once as well, because there's a bandwidth challenge. So in some cases, it's a challenge. Sometimes it's the smaller publishers or those that maybe just aren't as experienced in OA have to wait their turn, kind of learn the lessons and then kind of join the queue. So other publishers, I think we will see coming. For Springer Nature, I think, I actually started at Biomed Central, which was a fully open access publisher that Springer acquired. And so I've been in the fully OA world as well as in the mixed model world. And I don't know if we become entirely an IT service provider, but we are a service provider. That's what we do as publishers. And I think Colleen is absolutely right that there is a range of APCs, and we've got a range on our journals, and that's because some of them do offer different services. Some offer fast turnaround times, some are very selective and handhold you and shape the article with you, and there's different costs associated with that. And I think moving to a world where we can be more transparent, where authors can see the value of our titles, we're confident about that value, and I think that's a good thing. And Nature and the Nature research journals will become part of that journey. I think these journals are special in some ways in that they have a lot of content as well, which is maybe journalistic or commissioned and is not necessarily fully suited to an open access transition. But the original research content, we're going to get it on that path, but it's not easy, and we're trying. We are getting there.
But you're aware, I mean, there are economics to this, as Colleen's been saying, and financial sides. There is logic to this, but there is also romance. There is also history. You cannot take away from the fact that you cannot rebuild a title that's 150 years old suddenly with something else.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's been one of our guiding principles as we've been working on how we can enable Nature to open access. Our guiding principle is also we can't lose what it is that is contributing real value, and the authors and the readers and that everyone is really getting a lot from. It's very important that we develop a model, price points, models that still maintain the integrity of the journal. And we're getting there, and we hope to have more to share on that in due course. But that's definitely been one of the challenges for a portfolio like Nature.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions coming in for you, but I'm going to break it up a bit. But I'm going to ask this one to Suzanne, and I'm hoping you can help. I mean, Suzanne, the existing scientific journal format, as we've been talking about, it's held obviously in very high regard by many academics. It used to be that just the very act of being published in Science or Nature can secure your career. There's a rather more skeptical view of open access journals and platforms. How do you win the hearts of academics, particularly lukewarm academics, and persuade them that not only should they use publishing platforms like Opera's instead, but they should value it as much?
Well, I'm not sure the goal is to persuade them. It's mainly to show them that that we are in a changing world regarding the publication, open scholarly communication, and we can envision a different way of ensuring high quality of publication, ensuring or securing the career of the researcher. So this is more something like that. This is not an idea of how to persuade people to change or to adopt new practices. But more to provide new services and not only services. By the way, it's also it's exactly what has been said before about the new peer review practices. I think it was in the first panel actually. But how to make sure. Sorry.
The new normal, working towards this not being something extraordinary, but it being the new normal. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, how to explore new way of making open peer review, and how this can reassure the researcher, and especially young researcher, that it will have the same impact, and not in terms of impact factor or KPIs, such as Mark highlight at the end of his presentation.
Okay, and talking of Mark, I think this next question is for him. This is a comment that came in during Mark's talk. I particularly enjoyed the statement about university rankings, as in the UK, where universities are always highly ranked, 2/3 of GDP is produced by financial transaction in the city and not by knowledge-based industries for OA 2020 transformative agreements. I thought the challenge was that journals do not have to make any concrete commitments to actually transform to fully open access. Didn't the OA 2020 agreement simply set an APC to match a total budget based on historical subscription spending? How is what you pay related to the true cost? There's about 3 different kinds of embedded questions in there, Mark, so pick the one you like most.
Yeah, I think this is more for Colleen regarding OA 2020. So I let her answer that question. But I may say something about the university rankings. I think if you look, I mean, I'm not per se fundamentally opposed to these rankings, but if you look in some of these more prominent rankings, if you look under the hood and see what goes into these rankings, it is again mostly in one of these prominent rankings. It's about the number of papers published in Science and Nature. In another one, it's 30% of the index is about citations indistinctively. So I think they are completely they do lack a certain level of finesse, and then they are just, and most people actually don't even know what goes into these rankings. And then they are advertised. When they come out and University X makes a big fuss, we have now moved up 20 positions in the latest ranking. So I don't think that's. It's always interesting to see how brilliant people fall into the traps of these kind of very simplistic and artificial measures. But regarding the APC budget, I think it's best for Colleen to answer for that.
Yeah, if I'll just jump right in then. Yeah. So I'm going to take a very practical example because it's always better to speak about real things. The project deal agreement with Springer Nature, for example, in Germany. What we have here, first of all, why focus on the big publishers, right? With the big journals, because it's the highest impact. Quite frankly, it's where the majority of our money is spent in institutions, and so if we want to make a change, we need to do that with our money. Then if we look at what we have achieved, yes, right now the spending level, actually it's not the same. It's less than before. So we come from a situation where in Germany where there was the institutions were paying millions in subscriptions, and on top of that there were APCs paid in the wild for hybrid publication, right? Now, with the deal agreement in the negotiations, first of all, that hybrid spend in the wild has gone away. So that's already a savings to German institutions. But in exchange, German institutions have the same subscription access before, actually more, because now it's the entire journal portfolio and it's open to many more institutions. And all of the research, all articles published in the journals of Springer Nature, the hybrid journal Springer Nature, are now open access. So it looks to me like as a first step in the transition, that's a pretty good step, a lot more for the same money that we are spending. Of course, that is a first step and the steps will continue, but we're not to a point where we're not in a situation of talking about APCs. We have created transparency. So when we go to do another negotiation with another publisher, and if we're paying a per article fee to Springer Nature and Wiley for an article, it's going to be very difficult for another publisher to justify why we would need to pay more. Of course, our objective is to continuously pay less. That's everybody's objective. But why would we pay more if we're getting the same service of a per article cost?
Okay, I've got a few little questions that don't all relate, but I'm going to try and mop them up. And I think this one, Colleen, possibly also for you, since it's a global perspective. In another earlier ASOF session, the questioner says, I'm sorry, almost all these questions have come in with no names attached. It was stated that the Chinese are publishing more and more, obviously, in Chinese journals. Now, apart from the language, are these open access or not? What's the global share of Chinese publications? And I guess I should probably be asking, annexing to that, what are the intentions of Plan S in terms of dealing with Chinese publishers and Chinese publications as well?
I'm not sure who should start on that one.
I was thinking you, but maybe not.
Oh, okay. What do I know? I know that in China, we have, if I'm not mistaken, China has surpassed the US in terms of publishing output. Everyone is agreeing with that. Yes. And so obviously, to have a global transition, we want China to be involved. I know that one transformative agreement has been signed by the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So I see that as a foothold, and we have a number of participants in OA 2020. So individual institutions looking, yes, they've stated, I want this transition. Here we get into the question of stakeholder alignment. We had a number of funders from the Chinese academic community at the last Berlin Open Access Conference. Mark, you were there as well, so maybe you can speak also from the funder perspective. But I think there is a desire there. I'm not quite sure when the things will actually be moving in terms of concrete steps.
Okay. I'm trying to carry out the firing line for a while because there's a lot of questions for Carrie, but I'm going to have to bring you back in now. So a couple of things. First of all, if publisher processes added the value publishers charge for them, wouldn't embargoes be unnecessary because customers would be willing to pay regardless?
So I think there's a misunderstanding that our only cost involved is in the that production of the article. There's actually a lot of cost that goes in terms of organizing the peer review, ethics checks, plagiarism. Actually, it's about, I think, 50% of publishers' costs can be upstream in the process, pre-accept. So I think that's a useful point to bear in mind. But also, I think what we're mindful of now as technology has evolved with regards to green open access is that the author's accepted manuscript, particularly if it was available under a CC BY license, actually it's much more discoverable now. It would be easier for other people to also add their own value or do something else with that. So I'm not necessarily defending the subscription model because I think it's a legacy model, and we're definitely for the transition. And so for me, it's like we should just really be focusing on gold because the version of record, that final bit, is better. But if we allow ourselves to get hung up on green, it's just easier. Green is easier to say, let's do a policy on green. But then nobody has to organize their funds. They don't have to do the agreements that Colleen just talked about because you've enabled green, but you've got this halfway house. You haven't enabled that full potential. And so that's where I think the focus would be.
Okay, final one for you for now, at least for now. Does Springer Nature still stand by their claim that their articles cost 10,000 to 30,000 euros per article? And if so, should the taxpayer be paying such ridiculous amounts for the science that they already fund?
So that, I would just be clear, I think that was a quote that was made some years ago regarding articles in Nature, so not all Springer Nature articles. But I will say, the cost involved in producing a Nature article is really, really high. To give you a context, we have over 100 what were previously kind of PhD research scientists. Actually, no, sorry, that's on one journal, that's on Nature Communications. On the Nature research portfolio, I think it's over 600 staff in-house working on those manuscripts. So that's 600 full-time employees. That's just on the science side. That's not the art production, all the rest of it. And so those journals and that special thing that the Nature portfolio provides comes at a cost. It comes at a manual people cost, and that's why those costs are high. If you look at our article processing charges on Scientific Reports, which is like the world's biggest journal, it's under 2,000 euros, and we have a large in-house team, but actually we rely on over 10,000 editorial boards members globally, and the costs are lower. Nature portfolio rejects 95% or 90% of 95% of its content coming in. So handling those submissions is expensive if you're not actually monetizing the articles. Broad scope journal like Scientific Report accepts 60% of its content, so you can spread that cost. So there's different costs to different titles, and 10 to 30,000 is a really broad range, but I would stand by that the costs are a lot higher on Nature. That is a fact. Okay,
nearly out of time. I've got one more question that was probably aimed at you, but I'm going to ask it to Mark anyway, just to vary things as well. What about this argument, Mark, that if you open up publishing, there will be inevitably a drop in quality control? And could that have an impact in terms of not only the quality of appreciated science, but also in the quality of science journalism? More likelihood of needles being lost in bigger haystacks, more risk of poor quality but sensational sounding science getting more publicity, more likelihood of spreading fake news?
Okay, there are maybe two aspects to this regarding the research papers per se. We have had a number of open access journals and publication platforms around for quite some time now. And what we can clearly see, there is no correlation with quality here. There are high quality open access journals, just as there are high quality subscription journals, and vice versa. There are low quality subscription journals. They have been put into these bundles. So although no one wanted them, the publishers have put them into these large bundles. We had to buy them, just as there are low quality open access journals. So I don't think there is no correlation here. What I want to say is maybe indeed one-off, and PlanS is only about the primary research. We have it's not about edited work. It's not about what I say the first half of Science or Nature. So that's not concerned by. We're not claiming that this should be open access. We recognize that this is journalistic work, and that probably readers should pay for that. So we're not saying that this needs to change. It's just about the primary research. So to make that very clear, and I think probably one of the future roles of publishers, in particular learned society, should be more to go into curation rather than having paywalled primary research. They should probably more focus on curation. I think that's a very useful service which they would deliver to the scientific community. And the final word may be about these ultra selective journals. I don't think that this can be an argument to pay more. I mean, if you have a journal which rejects 95% of the submitted papers, that's just an enormous waste of efforts and money, because this is not 95% bad science. I can't believe it. I still think that journals should be there to do quality checks. But if you go and say I reject 95% of the papers, well, that's the choice of the journal. But you cannot then afterwards say, well, therefore the prices are so high because we have to divide the total cost by the very few numbers of papers. So that's those who reject 95% of the papers. That's their problem. They have to justify it, but that cannot not justify per se an extremely high APC.
Okay. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and make the last two questions mine, because there's a couple of things I really want answers to, and I think it will sum up nicely. I get the impression from all of you are fairly upbeat about Plan S. You're sure that a change is going to come if you were not sure exactly what the change is going to be. But what do you think is the most risk of slowing down or scuppering Plan S? And I want to hear from each of you, but I'm going to start with Carrie, because I have a feeling you're mostly worried about fluctuations in support and funding from research funders and institutions.
I think that's fair. I think it's security of funding, and I think probably the rise of green open access and so people not putting in those funds in place. I think to say, for example, we will stop funding by X date, 2024, 2025, when some of these transformative agreements that you go into are at least 3-year contracts. Sometimes they're 4 years, sometimes they're 5-year. And you might actually put off a consortium from going into the agreement if we're negotiating now probably for 2022 agreements, but they might be worried that some of their funding is going to be pulled by the end of it. They might not want to do an agreement. So I think funding security and stability is quite important.
Great, thanks. Suzanne?
Yeah, I wouldn't say funding security actually, because I totally agree with what Colin said about the fact that we already have enough money for open access journals. There are already money, so maybe it's more about quality of research, or maybe evaluation of the research.
Okay, Colleen? Your mic is still shut, Colin.
Yes, sorry. A little slow on the uptake here. Yeah, well, specifically Coalition S, what would slow Coalition S down? I think that's inertia. I mean, personally, I think that Coalition S presents a very good case, and yes, change. We need to think about change, and people are afraid of change, and because economically, it makes sense to me. It makes sense for research. The concern about concern about open access and what is it good or not good? I mean, I think we are beyond that now. I think we're beyond the point of thinking about there's only one way to achieve open access, and so Coalition S was very wise in presenting multiple pathways. I would say more it's this fear, but yes, of course, as Suzanne mentioned, there is the problem of research assessment that is there, but that doesn't stop us from doing anything right now. I mean, we have to act now. We can't simply wait until we solve that problem.
Mark?
I think I can fully agree with Colleen. So the midterm challenge for all of us, but especially also for funders, is to change the research culture, the reward and incentive systems. We've started doing that, but that's it is an endeavor that will take some time. But here again, we will not wait. We will do the two things in parallel. So we will keep on, and I hope I can reassure Colleen that there will be no inertia. So we will not we will not rest here, and simply move. I see when I see what has happened in the past 2 years since we launched Plan S, then I'm very optimistic that this time we're on the right track, and that this time we can really manage to move and to transform the whole system.
Good. We've managed to end on a really upbeat note. So that is where I have the tricky task of closing down open access. Otherwise, we'll be open for criticism of overrunning. But to formally finish things and take us almost full circle, I'm going to hand over to Anna Risa, who is still a special advisor to the Research Council of Norway and who organised this double session and put it all together. So before she thanks us, though, I would like to thank her and the team, plus our speakers, and of course yourselves for passing the Trieste test of technology and taking part with us. Anna, all yours. Open your mic, Anna.
Yes. Thank you very much, Quentin, and thank you all speakers and our audience who asked many interesting questions. I think we've had very interesting afternoon, and many of us have learned a lot about these issues, I think. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully we will see you again in next ESOF. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.